There's something really unique about adventure games. Something that, for me at least, is different from any other genre. And so I think it's pretty natural for me to wonder, why? Why is it so different? And how does it continue to make games that are one of a kind? Well, first, I think it's a good idea to see where it all first started.
3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
It's 1969. The space race ends with the first astronauts on the moon. The world's also introduced to its first decade in the history of the video game industry. And with something as big as the first moon landing, it's no surprise that early games are all about space. They were a little primitive, but they were the first of their kind, and they were made by computer scientists, not designers. Seven years later, a man named Will Crowther had recently divorced. His now ex-wife Pat was an avid caver, and so in the time they were together, Will took up the same hobby, along with already being a rock climber and a programmer. But because of his divorce, he put a pause on his caving, and also started to feel spaced apart from his daughters. Because he wasn't caving, he had more time on his hands than usual. So what better than to program a game about exploring caves for his daughters to play? And so without knowing it, the first adventure video game ever documented was born, and it went by the name Colossal Cave Adventure. Yeah, it was simple. Computers weren't powerful enough for fancy graphics, so it was just a text adventure for now. But most importantly, his kids had fun playing it, so in that sense, it was a major success.
Nice to have you with us, Nolan. When you invented your first video game, did you have any idea that it would take off? I mean, do with it what it's done today?
Yes, I did, but I didn't think it'd do it quite as quickly.
1 billion games are played every month.
Video games are the latest craze to sweep the country.
Complaints from parents that children have skipped school or stolen money to play the games.
Do video games cause violent behavior?
22 billion quarters poured into video games last year.
By 1982, arcade games would reach a new peak, part of what would later be coined the Golden Age. Companies like Atari grew so quickly they had a hard time managing. We had 24 and 26-year-old MBAs running around making multi-million-dollar decisions. At one point, it seemed like it was less about making games and more about releasing them. One example would be E.T. He asked me what I thought. I said I think it's a very dumb idea. We've never really made an action game out of a movie. And he said, well, I've also guaranteed Spielberg a $25 million royalty regardless of what we did. They had 6 weeks to produce, manufacture, package, and market E.T. for Christmas. It was a disaster. Nobody liked the game. Pac-Man got the same treatment. It was described as flickery, it had no music, and overall barely resembled the original Pac-Man. Pac-Man ended up with 5 million unsold copies, and E.T.'s unsold cartridges were buried in a New Mexico landfill. By now, the market was oversaturated, and people were more interested in a new computer than a game console. And so the Golden Age was over. "1983 marked the largest video game crash ever, dropping US revenues from around $3.2 billion to just $100 million in 3 years. There was one company, though, that wanted to pull video games straight out of their grave. Nintendo had a plan, and they called it the NES. The console was designed to look like a VHS player, a popular item at the time, and all games on the system needed Nintendo's stamp of quality. It was an educated leap of faith, and it worked.
It may be the most addictive toy in history, and it's definitely the hottest thing this Christmas. Nintendo video games.
This is as big or bigger than anything the toy industry has ever seen.
The last Super Mario Bros. 2 was just sold.
Success was an understatement. It was in such high demand, Nintendo even had a video game help service titled Nintendo Powerline.
50,000 people call Nintendo's 800 number every week.
How do you get the wand? Is the wand in 7?
No, you're going to get the red candle in 7, just like in the first quest.
And the NES ended up being home to some of the most iconic games of all time.
Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, Super Mario Bros., Kid Icarus, and Metroid are among Nintendo's biggest sellers, but so far, none has surpassed Zelda in popularity.
As a kid, Shigeru Miyamoto, a game designer at Nintendo, would explore the fields and woods in his hometown, Kyoto. One day he found a cave and eventually gathered the courage to go inside. That cave went on to be the leading inspiration for The Legend of Zelda, a game series that's become one of my favorites of all time. Miyamoto said his team was working on Zelda and Super Mario Bros. At the same time, and he thought that while Super Mario Bros. Should be linear, The Legend of Zelda should be the total opposite. He was afraid people wouldn't like the fact that this game made people stop and think about what they should do next, but the reaction was a polar opposite. The Legend of Zelda was the first NES game to sell 1 million units in the US, and reviews were overwhelmingly positive, setting a new standard for adventure games. Later in the 90s, the industry's adventure genre was forced into a corner to make room for first-person shooter games like Half-Life and Doom, which dominated the market. The market for adventure games became saturated too, after a lot of designers tried to copy Myst. Myst was a 3D adventure game that had no clear goal except to explore the island you were put on. The game gave you a lot of freedom but almost no backstory, so you would figure things out at your own pace. It was unique in ways like this, so it's a little ironic that so many people tried to copy it. Another reason adventure games fell in popularity was because they were seen as just too unfeasible. They're just too art intensive, and art is expensive to produce and to show. As the FPS genre continued to grow, the adventure genre continued to shrink. And so people at this time might not have been surprised if they were told the FPS genre would still be big today. But who would have thought adventure games would do the same? The late 2000s saw technology continue to revolutionize. Designers didn't pass up this opportunity, and this meant a new rise for the adventure genre. The industry saw genre-defining titles like San Andreas, Fallout 3, Fable 2, and more. And this was just the start of the revival of adventure. The 2010s are when I started to play video games. And I think I got lucky because this was the time limitations started to fade away, and as a result, some amazing games were released. And I guess that brings us to right now. I feel like we're in a unique moment where games aren't really limited by hardware anymore, like they have been for most of their history. And I think the adventure genre is one that always seems to take full advantage, because there's something about that never-ending world in Minecraft, the creative freedom to do whatever you want with no boundaries. That first time playing Breath of the Wild, being shown that massive landscape without knowing just how much there is to discover. Moving past miles of photo-esque scenery as you learn more about the characters of Red Dead Redemption. In all of these games, you know, there's a world just waiting for an adventure.